What's up guys, Asian here again, and we will be reviewing the PTS patch notes 5.1.3. So this is the most recent of the PTS patch notes here, and there are a lot of changes that are coming with this PTS patch cycle. So this is another one of the big changes here, kind of typical of what we see in PTS cycles. For those guys who are not really experienced with the PTS, typically speaking, it goes first week is the initial release, so all the big changes happen there. Second week is mostly just bug fixes. Third week is when you start to see rebalances happening. Fourth week and the fifth week are also a couple of rebalances, a couple of bug fixes. It all depends on how the patch cycle is currently going. This does seem to be a fairly big combat rebalance cycle itself, so we are anticipating seeing more changes in the coming future for the fifth week of the PTS, and potentially even between the fifth week of the PTS and when this patch goes live. So this particular cycle 5.1.3 does seem to have some fairly significant changes overall to a lot of different sets and a lot of different basically more items than actual skills. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So again, for those guys who are unfamiliar with my channel specifically, I only really take a look at PvE stuff, so where I feel comfortable I will talk a little bit about PvP, but mostly it'll be just straight up PvE stuff. So this is 5.1.3. This is the fourth week of the PTS. We're anticipating a fifth week and then the release. So about 2 more weeks until Scalebreaker goes live. So, under the known issues, they do note that the major protection for the Immortal Warrior set is not working. Power Surge, they are going to improve the functionality, or I should say, just make a new functionality for Power Surge, but that is not yet complete. So it is, I believe, currently on the PTS. I didn't really take a look at the Power Surge actual tooltip itself, but it will be released in a future update. The Growing Swarm target cap, this is a ability under the Warden skill tree. It's causing issues with performance when used in tandem with specific combinations of sets and passives, so target cap has been reinstated until something can be figured out in the future. Zens Redress has received some adjustments to how it operates, as well as a number tweaked from 2% total damage per dot to 1%. A little bit on this a little bit later. I'm actually very upset about this change here. Mutagens Burst Heal is too difficult to proc, and they are going to investigate a potential rework. It doesn't say whether it's going to be this patch or next patch. We'll have to wait and see. Then Vigor's rework will be adjusted at some point. They say they're taking a closer look at the core identity of Vigor and potentially making adjustments. Again, no indication whether this will happen in this patch or in a future patch, so just a couple of things to keep in mind here as we move forward. Moving on here, Dark Brotherhood, not big of a change here. Under Elsewhere, the only big thing here with combat and gameplay is the Bone Totem, which is a skill line under the Bone Tyrant skill tree. So they increased the duration of this ability and its morph by 1 second to help improve its animation of the totem crumbling, along with adding a new function. His ability will now pulse a fear once every 2 seconds after the initial 2-second delay, rather than only once. So this will help out Necromancer tanks. For those guys who kind of haven't been really following ESO too much, fear no longer chases enemies away and now basically freezes them in place. It's now a hard CC, so having a pulse, a fear pulse basically every 2 seconds actually does help out Necromancer tanks in terms of the hard CC department. Basically, if you don't manage to CC them the first time, you can chain them in and they'll be CC'd once they get chained in, as long as they're within that fear pulse duration. So pretty much a nice boost to Necromancer tanks here. But other than that, not much else here. So under the Scalebreaker, they did change a couple things with the dungeons themselves, but we're not really going to be covering them all too much here. Change some, I think this is achievement names, so they fixed some things in Sunspire, or not Sunspire, Somerset. But here's where the bulk of the patch notes is going to come into play, the combat and gameplay changes here. So the cost of Lava Whip has been reduced back down, so it seems like they completely missed that somehow, and now they've reduced it down again. Under Shadow Image, the Shadow Image will now allow you to teleport when it is on a destructive piece of terrain. So they have fixed that for PvP players who have been using this morph here. Sorcerers, they fixed an issue with Streak, so the damage and the stun are now unblockable as it should be. Under Surge itself, the ability will now trigger off of any critical strike instead of only critical damage, and continues to grant major sorcery. So this basically means, if I'm reading this correctly, any critical strike means both critical damage and critical healing. So this is tied into Power Surge's new functionality, which is still in the works. So kind of probably just a change that's just there to prepare for the eventual new functionality here. Critical Surge, they increased the healing granted by 10%, not that big of a deal. Under the Dual Wield line, the Hidden Blade no longer marks the target and now grants Major Brutality instantly. They did decrease the duration to 20 seconds. Under the Flying Blade morph, they improved the responsiveness of targeting for this ability's teleport attack when attempting to use it on an enemy within a group of targets. And they increased the duration of Major Brutality from the teleport activation to 40 seconds from 30 seconds here. So they did change Hidden Blade back in 5.1.0, so just go check out the original patch notes to see what they changed the Hidden Blade ability to. Under Healing Ward, they reduced the healing value from this ability to 33% of the shield's remaining strength down from 100, so pretty big slash there to overall healing strength here. But the heal can critically strike since the shield itself cannot crit. Under the Annulment Harness Magicka, they increased the bonus modifier per piece of light armor worn for the Magicka return to 33% at rank 4 from 6%, but this is based on the 5% on the ability's cost, so each piece of light armor will increase the return from 5% to 6.65% instead. So under the medium armor line, they reduced the duration of Major Expedition granted by Elude by 2 seconds, so it now lasts between 5 to 7 rather than 7 to 9 seconds. Major Expedition will now also better respect its procognition on what is considered a direct area of effect attack. Soul Trap, they did nerf Soul Splitting Trap, which is one of the morphs of Soul Trap, so now it'll affect any number of targets within 8 meters of the original target, rather than up to 5 in a 5 meter radius, but the damage per tick has been reduced by 33%, so it does end up dealing less single target DPS, but overall group DPS with Soul Splitting Trap is going to be phenomenal. If it has no enemy cap. I've seen screenshots of people who just laid down as many skeletons as they could within an 8 meter radius, and they are all getting hit by Soul Trap. So really big AoE potential here at the expense of some single target DPS. Under the Fighters Guild line, they just fixed an issue where Circular Protection was basically double dipping. So the base cost is 45.90 Circular Protection and its morphs. Now, under the itemization, this is where a lot of big changes are happening here. So the Cruel Flurry, which is the Maelstrom Dual Wield, they reduced the amount of weapon and spell damage granted to 1,000 from 2,003, so pretty much halved it. However, the bonus weapon and spell damage will now apply to any target applied damage over time effect cast within 4 seconds of the bonus being applied. So target applied damage over time basically means single target dots, rather than being consumed on your first dot effect. So this will result in less total power from the set, however it will be easier to apply them to multiple dots. And I do have a video coming up that's basically going to be showcasing this sort of change here and what this means for overall DPS. It is going to be a nerf, however it is not as big of a nerf as you guys might see just from reading this out loud. Drozakar's Claw, they reduced the weapon damage bonus per bleed effect to 133 from 200. This basically means that it'll be less effective, so dual wield two-hand builds, you guys are going to see a nerf if you are going to be using Drozakar's Claw, so Deadly Strike might end up being better option here rather than Drozakar's Claw. Going to explore that a little bit, basically another revisit of Deadly Strike versus Drozakar's Claw to kind of see how that ends up working out. Elemental Succession, they increased the spell damage bonus granted to 550, and they reduced the cooldown to 4 seconds from 8 seconds. Now, I did take a look at the set on the PTS, and it does say 5 seconds, so I'm not sure if that's a tooltip error or a patch notes error, but there have been some discussion as to whether or not this is going to be a good set for magDKs or Magicka Necromancers, because both classes only have elemental stuff when it comes to their class abilities. Dragon Knight's pretty much all flame damage, versus Magicka Necromancers, which kind of have an even split between fire and cold, and some shock damage as well. So I'll be testing that out on the PTS to kind of see how that plays out for specifically magDKs and Magicka Necromancers. Hall of Fang Thirst, they reduced the Magicka return a little bit here. Marsalok has been completely changed. So Marsalok initially did a burst damage when you bash every 7 seconds, when the damage increased based on the number of negative effects on the enemy. Now it is a damage over time for the exact same amount of damage, so the base is still 8,000 for 4 seconds. So it just basically reduced the overall effect I should say, the overall burst potential of the set here, probably for PvP purposes. Martial Knowledge has been changed, so the set will now trigger on light attacks when you're below 50% stamina instead of 75, and it'll take 8% additional damage for 5 seconds with an 8-second cooldown, versus 10 for 4 seconds with a 6-second cooldown. This does result in an overall nerf to Martial Knowledge, so the effective between taking consideration uptime and the 8%. It is now actually only a 5% when you just base, so if you include in other additional damage done modifiers, it actually ends up being a little bit weaker. Plus, the reduction to below 50% does make it a little bit harder to proc on a healer. Not difficult per se, but harder. There are still a lot of stamina consuming abilities that healers may use, particularly Templar healers, Power of the Light, Circle of Protection, Spiders, Shadow Silk. So it is still possible to proc Martial Knowledge, but will remain to be seen whether this is going to be a healer set or a tank set. There's kind of been discussions on both sides whether it will be viable on either or just one. Necropotence will now grant the magicka to Necromancer pets, so now you can use Necropotence on your Necromancers. Overwhelming Surge, they reduce the radius of the set to 8 meters, and then for Phoenix, they increase the damage shield granted and decrease the damage dealt. Then Trinamax Valor now has a proper telegraph to display where it is landing, and other than that, everything else is pretty much just sort of non-PvE oriented stuff. So the big changes here are the nerf to Martial Knowledge, the nerf to Zens Redress, and the changes to Cruel Flurry, as well as Elemental Succession. So 4 big changes here that I will have to take a look at. So Martial Knowledge is going to be a nerf, and I will kind of... it would probably be a very short video, but it will be basically saying just how much damage you can expect to see from Martial Knowledge compared to things like Alkosh or Torugs or other sets, support sets that increase overall damage there. Elemental Succession, I will do a video taking a look at that set compared to something like perhaps Spell Strategist or Burning Spellweave on a magDK or Magicka Necromancer. Cruel Flurry, I already have a video in the works right now taking a look at post-change versus pre-change. And again, it is going to be a nerf, but it's not as big of a nerf as you might initially think based on the parses that I've been seeing and the parses that I've been doing. And finally, Zens Redress. This change, let me just scroll up to it real fast, really bugs me. So I've been wanting to do a video on Zens Redress to kind of show you guys how it works, what actually counts towards Zens Redress. However, every single patch, including this patch right here, 5.1.0 all the way through to 5.1.3, Zens Redress has not worked. I tested it out a couple of hours after the PTS went live. Zens Redress still does not work, and they're planning to change it. I don't get it. Why are they nerfing this? I have no idea. Nobody's been able to test this. No one's been able to conclusively say these are the dots that are working. Perhaps they're changing it because they are not able to fix it. I don't know, but it peeves me that they're changing a set before anybody has actually been able to test it in a group scenario. Their rationale behind this is to reduce the overall power in a group setting. However, nobody's been able to test this in a group setting. So that really just pisses me off. It just speaks about ZOS's sort of overall design flaws when it comes to their design of the game. So with all that said and done, link down in the description below to the actual patch notes thread itself. So if you guys want to read it at your own leisure, kind of look through all the other changes and sort of make your own conclusions, you can certainly do that. Again, a couple of videos coming down the line based on all these changes here. Elemental Succession, Cruel Flurry, brief video comparing the new Martial Knowledge to other support sets. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.